All right. I got Christopher August on for episode 117 of the Balancing Act. How you doing today, Chris?
Good, brother. Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. One thing that I do with all of my, at least the first time guests, is I ask about your origin story. Basically, what led you to do what you do now?
Yeah, I feel like there's so much I could share in that, just because, our origin story, there's so many little intricacies that we all go through on our own hero's journey. And, I would say for me personally, my journey, maybe a little bit unconventional, maybe not in the sense of, having followed the path that I did from, living within the status quo to then leaving that behind. But essentially, back in 2011, 2012, I had just finished my master's degree in business leadership. On the outside, very successful. On the weekends, I was, DJing and partying. I was working at a corporate tech firm during the week, so I had my shit together per se. But for me personally, I felt a really deep sense of emptiness, really not filled with any sort of value. And for me, I really wanted to give back, to make a difference, to support others. And I just felt like I wasn't doing that. At that point, I was in my mid to, later 20s. And again, on paper, it all looked great, but on the inside, I felt completely depleted and unfulfilled. And so, I had really just asked a higher power, asked my higher self for a sign. Just years before this, I really started to tap deeper into my own spirituality, my own personal growth, but really just wondering, okay, is this the life that I meant to live? And it just, every time I asked that question, it felt like it was off. And so from there, I actually received a literal sign driving on the highway. I saw a big billboard one day after work while I was driving home back to my downtown apartment, and it said, "Are you ready to answer the call?" And this was very straightforward. And on the right hand corner, it said sponsored by the Peace Corps. And at that time, I didn't really know what the Peace Corps was. I heard of it in passing, but didn't really understand the depth of what the organization entailed. And essentially, for anybody listening to this, it's an American, governmental organization that essentially sends volunteers to all these different places around the world, in different facets and forms of projects and things that you're meant to do. And so I went home, I Googled all this, I found a Facebook group with some other volunteers in it, started asking questions. And next thing you know, I was applying. And then just about a year later, I got accepted. And I received an acceptance letter that said, "You've been accepted to Peace Corps Tanzania, Africa, and you have 7 days to decide." So, as you can imagine, that was a pretty defining moment on my hero's journey. It was sort of that first step of answering the call and that call to adventure. And so, of course, in that moment, I felt definitely some hesitation and fear. I didn't want to go to Africa. I want to go to South America.
Now,
But
I do want to pause just to give the
yeah, yeah.
to provide some context. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Gotcha. Okay.
So,
Did you go to school in New York as well?
I did. I did. I went to school in New York. I basically spent the first 25, 26 years of my life in Buffalo. And so wonderful upbringing and all of that and sense of living in Buffalo. But again, it was just, I needed to get away. And so I ended up accepting that. And 6 months later, I was flying halfway across the world, 8,000 plus miles to Tanzania, where I ended up living very primally, very connected to the land, very integrated in the community and the tribe, no electricity, no running water, no modern amenities, no English, speaking straight Swahili, for just over 2 years of my life. So I can break down the depth of that experience within itself, but that was my original sort of catalyst and initiation into really where I am today. I wouldn't be here having this conversation without that experience.
Yeah, no, the word that comes to mind as you're telling that story for me is purpose. You had
Mhm.
this emptiness feeling, and then you saw a literal sign, and then the alignment with your purpose began.
Yep.
But yeah, I do want to hear. I mean, you don't have to go in too far into detail, but I do want to hear a little bit about this Tanzania experience. As someone that just cherishes indigenous worldviews, I recognize that there's very diverse, but there are common threads in terms of recognizing the earth as a living being, in terms of recognizing the sun as a living being. And so, anyways, I'd just like to hear you expand on that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, just to paint the picture for anybody listening, that the first 3 months it's training ground. You arrive there with 35 other volunteers from all over the U.S., and you all get assigned a host family to live with for the first 3 months, and then each day you're going into training, learning the language, the culture, all of that sort of stuff. It's very intensive, and I'm, for example, placed in a house with a group of or a family of 8 people. And in this house, there's probably 2 bedrooms. I was in basically a transformed storage closet. The bathroom is a hole in the ground, and you cook over a wood fire. So very initiated right away, from living in this modern world to then going into this very primal place, this natural place of living. And it was very hard the first few months because it was like intense culture shock of being away from my family and friends, being immersed in this village, living with this family I didn't know, even though they were incredible people. I didn't really know any of the language of Swahili at that time. And so, it was a very big challenge, but it really pushed me to my edges and allowed me to expand in just those few months. And then from there, you are assigned a village throughout the country in which you'll then serve. So, just to kind of paint the picture once again, having been assigned a village 17 hours away from the capital city of Dar es Salaam, I had, probably about 4 or 5 different volunteers in my region, but the closest volunteer was an hour and a half away. So you're very immersed by yourself in this village. Your Swahili is still not the greatest, but you are basically taken in by these people, and you're there to serve. I was a health and business volunteer for my time there, but I learned so much from living on the land and from the people themselves. I felt by the end of my experience, I felt indebted to the people for all that they provided for me, whether it was knowledge, wisdom, or just care, and taking me in to feed me and take care of me and look out for me. There was so much I gained from that experience. And of course, in my downtime, you don't have internet or anything like that. So it was a lot of reading, a lot of writing. My writing, I looked back on it, was extremely prophetic to where we are today and sort of what I was envisioning and seeing at that time, which was, how many years ago? 12, 13, 14 years ago. So, yeah, just really, I left that experience uh, certainly a changed man, and definitely did not come back the same person as the person I had left.
Yeah, that's also. What's the story from the time you get back to getting into breath work?
Yeah, well, my catalyst into breath work, I was practicing Kundalini while I was there. Been given a video, a thumb drive actually from another Peace Corps volunteer. That's how we'd exchange like movies and TV shows, right? Is just like download the person's thumb drive, and someone had a Kundalini video on there, and I didn't know what Kundalini yoga was at the time, but I was starting to practice it. And right at that moment, I had gone, which was kind of my second initiation. I had gone to the Zambezi River in Zambia. And I went on a New Year's sort of adventure. There was a music festival there, but while I was there, I did some really adrenaline, wild stuff, jumping off cliffs, and ended up whitewater rafting on the Zambezi River. And that's probably one of the most treacherous, intense rivers in the world, filled with class 4 or 5 rapids. And that was the second part of this journey, was the wake up call for me, where I ended up falling out right on the start of a class 5 rapid out of the raft. And I was sucked under this incredible, powerful whirlpool of energy, and essentially fighting for my life. And basically coming up, gasping water, taking it in, going back down, and never really being able to catch my breath. And within that moment, I began, within, who knows, maybe a minute, minute and a half, started losing consciousness and actually ended up leaving my body and having a near death experience until I was ultimately saved by a kayaker at that time and revived and brought back to life. And that goes back to your question about breath. How did that come into play? Well, it was in that moment of taking my first breath once again and coming back into my body, back into this avatar, that I realized not only the profound nature of breath being this lifeline, but that I was here to share the power of breath with the world. And I didn't know what that looked like at the time, but many years later, as I sort of contemplated that experience, went into different certifications, and one thing led to the next to where I am today.
Wow, that's quite the story, man. How old were you at that time?
I was probably 28, 29.
Shoo.
Yeah. Yeah. Saturn return, intense experience then.
Yeah, man, for sure, for sure. So, obviously I got connected to you through Ryan. So, at what point
Yeah.
did cannabis become a part of this journey, this breathwork journey that you guys are on?
Cannabis, I've always been connected to the plant of cannabis. I mean, I started using and working with cannabis, not in an intentional way by any means, but more in a recreational way when I was like 13.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and so I was pretty young, and when I started to smoke cannabis. But it was after the Peace Corps, after I got back, I had just a lot of intense anxiety and depression that really hit me hard from reverse culture shock.
Hmm.
And I started to work with cannabis. I started to read a book that really changed my perspective called Cannabis and Spirituality by Stephen Gray.
Yeah, great book.
Wonderful book. And so that book really changed my perspective on what cannabis is and what it could be used for. And my spirituality and my connection to myself at that time was very heightened, considering my experience in Africa. And so this perspective of cannabis really brought me into a new relationship with the plant, and I can go on and on and on and talking about that relationship. But overall, I began to do meditation and yoga and breath work with cannabis, and began to see its profound powers of connecting me deeper within myself, not just the light, but also the shadows, and to reveal what has still been hidden or repressed or suppressed. And so that one thing led to the next. And, I mean, I don't know how many years ago now it's been since I met Ryan, but, I was well into my breathwork journey, started my company Beats and Breath. And then, Ryan and I connected, and, we just became really good friends, and had a really unique formula of bringing people into these experiences of working with breath and cannabis in a sacred, medicinal, intentional way in which people can access the unseen parts of themselves, open their intuition, and really tap into the power within themselves. And so I find that cannabis and breath is like one of the most beautiful and perfect marriages and unions of technology and medicine that are available to us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You mentioned intention, and I think there's a lot of different aspects or differentiators between, recreational cannabis use, which I'm not against actually. I think it's the best substance in terms of harm reduction as well. Like even if you
For
are
sure.
using it to escape, it's better than heroin, alcohol, all these other ones, right?
No
But
doubt.
that intentionality, and for me, I think one of the most substantial or significant differences just mentally is recognizing the plant as a living being rather than like just another drug or another substance to get high. Like you're merging with another living spirit, you're having a communication with a life force, and that recognition to me is what brings somebody out of a harm reduction relationship or a recreational or even a medicinal, and not seeing it as a spirit, as a living being, as a connection to the earth. That's when you really take that giant leap from harm. I mean, it can still be used positively even without that awareness, but having that awareness just amplifies the experience to a degree that's really hard to put into words, which I think is why breath work, really that just conscious inner knowing and that inner conversation, like you said, it's just a perfect marriage and a perfect pairing. However, I do want to get a little bit further into this breathwork stuff because for me personally, I've always struggled with group breath sessions. Like I can't do the 4x4. It's like for me, I have to listen to my own rhythm in any given moment. And sometimes my breath wants me to inhale 8 seconds or 6 seconds. Even the thought of counting seems to throw me off as well. It's just like I need to feel in all the way in and then all the way out. And for me, it's about deeper out than it deep in, but deeper out. Um,
Yep.
so I guess do you have any tips for somebody like that? Because for me, when I'm in a group, I feel like I'm always out of rhythm with the rest of the group because I'm either not getting the full breaths if I'm trying to stay on everybody else's rhythm, or if I'm doing my own rhythm, I'm not in sync with everybody else.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's kind of why I developed the technology that I did with sonic breathwork. And the reason we did what we did as far as combining, rhythmic based breathing techniques with soundscapes as well as the breath sounds infused in the music is it keeps people entrained in a rhythm. And, I always say, I'm not just like Ryan does, like, I'm not a rules person. Like, you do what your body is telling you to do and listen to that intelligence. But what I've found is the way in which we have it structured, it creates coherence amongst individual by themselves breathing or amongst the group. And this in itself can be yeah, I mean, I think in other breath sessions where you're having to count on your own or keep up without any sort of guidance around the music and all of that, that can be a really difficult journey for a lot of people. And it's why I created what I created. But with that being said, speaking to sort of your calling to breathe out longer and to really extend that exhale, that's more of a parasympathetic activational type of state of being that you're desiring to reach through that extended exhale, right? And so when we're breathing out longer, we're activating the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, which personally I'm all about longer, slower breathing versus the holotropic, sympathetic, masculine type of forceful breathing. There are applications for it that I find it to be really beneficial to get past the default mode network of the brain and to really access some psychedelic states. But to do that every day is not feasible for everybody. And that's why what I've developed and what I've co-created is that more so that 4-4-4-8 rhythms, things that really support in really guiding you back to a place of safety and presence and receptivity, because we need to be, in my opinion, based on the cultural landscape in the society, which is very much gas pedal sympathetic, we need to come back into the yin, into the parasympathetic. And I believe that's where all the deep healing lies, because the nervous system is the command center of the body. And so the slower breathing opens us up to be able to heal the deeper parts of ourselves. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful illustration right there. And I think the music part of it, because I did go into one of y'all's breathworks, and the music did seem to help keep me a little bit closer. But when I thought about it, I'd still get off beat. But then when I let those thoughts go, it would just kind of sink in with the music. So there is, I see where you're going with that. That's key, I think, actually. Um,
100%.
yeah. Well, so before I get to the next question, then how do you choose your music for these sessions?
Well, they're all originally produced and created by myself and Johnny Buffalo, who's my business partner in Beats and Breaths. So those are all, that's not coming from some Spotify playlist. This is all originally produced music that we're creating intentionally for these journeys. So it's not some randomized playlist that a lot of breathwork practitioners use. So I'm fortunate to be able to have access to a really curated way of creating these experiences.
No, that's amazing. That's wonderful. So yeah, I do want to start going a little bit further. I have a philosophy degree. I'm super into conscious cannabis. Go to sweat ceremonies. I'm a weirdo, a truth seeker, but I do like to just hear about And I'm just going to throw a few terms out there and just kind of let you expand. But like your takes on the power of faith or belief, God, if you like that word or don't like that word, whatever you think that means, or the nature of reality, or just your worldview. If you want to just expand on a big picture, how you see this matrix simulation, whatever you want to call it, that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, man, this is such a deep and profound topic to explore. Well, I'll keep it simple, and kind of how I perceive everything is that, really just coming back to the basis and the law of correspondence, as within, you know, so without. And everything is based on our own projection of our consciousness. That this could be equated, as it has by many philosophers, to a dream or to a movie or to a game. And all of that is just a projection of what is happening inside of us. And therefore, a big part of my entire work that I take people on, whether it's in breath work or coaching or any of these places, it's moving from the victim stance to the creator.
Are your choices rooted in purpose, or are you running on autopilot? Modern science has proven mindset directly affects physical health. The story you're telling yourself right now is literally wiring your nervous system. At Canna Clarity, I use reverent cannabis guidance to amplify your awareness and dissolve the limiting agreements hiding deep in your subconscious programming. Rewrite your story, rewire your biology. Book your free call today at canna-clarity.com.
And knowing that the power and the presence and the love of God is actually within us, and that same energy that we've projected and outsourced out there to some man or woman or being in the sky is actually the energy that is contained within in us, because we are made in the image and like of God, great spirit, creator, source, whatever anybody wants to call it. And so, really, the journey is moving from this is happening to me to this is happening through me. And then I'm 100% responsible for my experience. And then, where that sort of level of the yin and the feminine comes into the picture is that, yes, I am creating, but I'm also a part of this dance and co creation with the intelligence of life. And what that is and how to really describe that, it's hard to put into words, but it's more of a felt experience when we learn how to surrender the deepest aspects of our control mechanisms of the ego into the river of life. And that has been, you mentioned the word faith or even trust, right? It's a trust fall into the unknown, which is a scary place for the ego to reside, because it means it doesn't have control. But what I've found is, through my own personal journey, through working with breath and other tools, is that the deeper level that I surrender my own will and my own plan for thy will or divine will or whatever we want to call it, that life has a very magical and synchronistic and miraculous way of working itself out in its own timing and rhythms. And the less I interfere with that, I can have the vision, I can be guided by a vision. And really, I always tell people this, it's very simple. When we learn how to tune into our own intuition and we begin to follow our excitement, our joy, our passion, which is really the highest expression of our soul, that in itself is the guidepost. And from there, all we have to do is every step of the way to follow what feels good in that moment, and then allow life to take care of itself. And the thing is that I've learned the most is that life doesn't happen according to your own timing, that it's very, very different than what your preconceived notion and expectation is. And the more I've learned to let go into that and trust that, the more that I've expanded into much greater states of internal freedom and abundance and peace, knowing that there's a greater force at play that I'm co-creating with at all times.
That's beautiful. First of all, that was absolutely. I didn't dis. I'm the type of person that will tell you even if I disagree with one little thing, and I'll give you an example before we get off of here. But that was beautiful. I couldn't have agreed more with all of that. It reminded me of. Have you ever read The Alchemist?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he's on this journey. He's following the signs, the omens, the synchronicities, He believes, he expects the treasure is going to be at the pyramids because that's what his vision has been. He gets to the pyramids, he gets his ass whooped by some thieves, and they mock him for following his dream and tell him his dream that he never followed because he's way too smart to follow his dream because that's stupid. But his dream is that there's a treasure buried under this spot at this church that Santiago had worked at his whole life. So he just goes home and digs in the spot that this guy who communicated his dream, and he finds the treasure. So it's like he didn't get what he expected at all, but by following the signs, he still found the treasure.
Exactly. It's a great example. And and honestly, dude, like I am so happy that there's been so many times I wanted this thing right over here. I wanted that and I never received it. But the blessing that I received in return of not getting that thing was way greater than that thing itself, right? So the mind has its own way of projecting this is the thing, right? And, let's just call it on a very easy level, whether it's money or success or recognition. I'm so glad that I didn't get that at that time because if I did, who knows what path I would have veered down to have learned to come back to where I am now. So
100%. I resonate with that 100%. Yeah. So before I get to my last discussion point, though, how did you end up in Mexico?
Again, following my highest excitement. It's kind of what I do in life. It's something that I've really learned to lean into the courage and the fear that sometimes you feel. But I think just having traveled around the world and all the things, it just made it a lot easier than maybe someone else that hasn't really left their sort of origin of being. I was here doing a men's retreat back in 2021, and I was came down here to co-facilitate, and I just ended up having such a really powerful moments of synchronicities that transpired that I ended up signing a lease on the place, and going back and telling my son's mom and my son at the time, I said, "Hey, we're moving to Mexico in a month." So we ended up packing our bags and coming down here, and have been here since. But I'm now in the midst of actually of another transitionary period. I'm moving again. I'm moving up to the Pacific Northwest because that's where Spirit's calling me. So I'm just following the call.
That's amazing, man. I'm feeling the call to Todos Santos myself, but as I mentioned earlier, I have a 12-year-old, so the timing, I'm not in
Yeah.
any rush. But man, that visit to Todos Santos, the ocean right there, you turn around and there's mountains. It's like you literally get everything right there. I was just, it felt like heaven on earth to me, truly. So
A beautiful place.
so yeah, I told you I'd give an example of if I do disagree with somebody, I do it respectfully, but I will say, yeah, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. Like that was a beautiful illustration of your worldview, and like I said, I couldn't agree with it more. One thing that I noticed on the last podcast that I did, I have untraditional views when it comes to monogamy. Not that I'm against monogamy, I just think it's a lifestyle choice that actually goes against our nature,
Mhm.
somewhat like being a vegan. It can be the proper moral choice for some people, and they have good reasons to do it, and there are benefits to it. But for me, I think our natural state is such that we are a promiscuous mammal. Uh, and so the example I wanted to give is my very last podcast. I had Adam Shell on, and he's a truth seeker, and he was laying out his worldview and his, I guess somewhat. I came at, and that's because of the way I framed the question. I did come at it from a more like, what's the dark forces, what's the conspiracy going on here? And he, ran off a lot of stuff that I agreed with, but he said something about, like monogamy being the proper way. And I was like, I agree with most of that, but I think there's an ethical way to be non-monogamous. And it was a little bit of a playful, it was at least respectful from my end. I felt like he was being respectful, but also like forcefully disagreeing that polyamory is just not the way or whatever. But I just want to hear your views on this. I read Sex at Dawn by Chris Ryan, and I've been looking into this stuff. And even, some of my personal relationships, I've had these deeper
Oh
talks
yeah.
about this. And yeah, I just feel that, we can have the best of both worlds. We can have a companion, a spiritual, emotional, mental companion that we're building a life with, and have the recognition that we're both going to find attraction in others. And if something happens, like it doesn't break up our companionship.
Mm. It's such an interesting topic to explore because it is quite charged, just like veganism or carnivorism, whatever it is, right? As it pertains to people's lifestyles, people are very attached to their belief systems and worldviews. And if anything is challenging that, it's where the protection mechanism of the ego and the defensiveness starts to come in, right? So from a psychological, psycho-spiritual perspective, I get that. And because I was there, right? And I've been and explored many different worlds and worldviews, and ultimately, intuitively, began to form what I feel is best for me, right? And at the end of the day, I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think that's
I
all an
agree with
illusion,
that.
good or bad,
I
right?
agree with
Like
that.
that's a human that's a human attachment to
I
what
also
we.
feel like having that disposition of not seeing things as right or wrong allows you to have like a freer expression and like not feel defensive about whatever it is you might feel around these more sensitive issues or topics, right?
100%, but we live in a we right now, as these avatars, we live in a plane of duality in which we have these black or white type of experiences, or somewhat in the middle and gray, and we get to choose that based on our own soul's evolution. Do I feel polyamory is right for everybody? No. Do I feel monogamy is right for everybody? No. I think everybody gets to choose their experience. Now, looking at the context of this, yeah, historically, living for the majority of our human existence, living in tribe, I would probably say that most people have lived in more of a polyamorous type of way. Now, in this modern world, I think there's a lot of convolution around that, and it takes someone with a high state of consciousness to really play that path out in a way that is serving to their own evolution and growth. Now, what I see and what I've perceived is that a lot of people walking that path of having multiple partners, it's very much from a low consciousness perspective where they're unable to handle that and get swept up in that whirlwind of energy that it creates, and the amount of time it is to invest in these different people, which actually then just creates destruction overall. Is it still serving? 100%. But I think if we're talking about from an evolutionary higher state of consciousness perspective, it definitely takes a high level of awareness to be able to live that type of lifestyle in a way that is conducive to the ultimate growth of everybody involved. Now, with that being said, I personally, I man, I was like, how much time we got? Because I can share a story.
We got plenty of time. We got plenty of time.
So basically, this is something I haven't really shared too much publicly. My inner circle knows all about this, but essentially, back in 2017, so I mentioned my son's mom, Sarah, incredible master teacher, deep spiritual bond, just an incredible woman. And I have nothing but respect for her. We're no longer together romantically and haven't been for many years. However, back in 2017, we had met in the Peace Corps. She was serving as a volunteer, just to give some context. We came back together, and back in 2017, she had come to me and she had, said, "I met this person. I have a lot of feelings for this person, and this is just a year after we got married." And said that, I have a lot of love and I'm not sure what to do. I feel conflicted. And in fact, I feel that I'm not built for monogamy. I'm actually built for more polyamory. And of course, that in that moment shattered my entire worldview. It fucked me up. And it brought me into the deep levels of my own inner child, which was lashing out in rejection and abandonment, right? Which was the stories playing out that I'm not good enough, that she loves this other person, even though she was completely honest, even though she had never done anything with this person physically. But, all of this was challenging my belief system. And so that entire 6 to 7, 8 months or whatever, really, like, it broke it broke me down mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it brought me to a place where ultimately she ended up cutting things off because I was just like too much in my hurt child. And there was a lot of rupture there, right? And probably things that maybe could have been done better. But overall, it was exactly what I needed, the medicine. So fast forward, I don't know, 3 years later, I ended up meeting a woman based on a project I was working on and together. And I had very deep feelings for this person, similar to what Sarah had sort of shared at that point 3 years earlier. And so now I'm getting it from this place of empathy that, oh shit, like I know exactly what she was going through. What ended up happening of that, I ended up, reluctantly communicating this to Sarah, even though like I felt very scared and conflicted within myself. And she was very open to it. She's like, wow, amazing. Like you should definitely pursue this in this way. And, for me, it was like a big wake up call because I was lashing out and being in this hurt place. But overall, I learned a lot from this experience because what I realized is yes, we definitely, even in relationship, there's going to be people we feel attracted to physically, maybe spiritually, emotionally. Do we have to act on that all the time? No, I don't think so. And I think that would be kind of, maybe not the best thing to do all the time. But
Yeah. The other
overall,
side of the imbalance.
yeah, I want to acknowledge that that definitely is a part of our human nature.
Right.
Now, having surfed this wave for a while now, and actually not really existing fully in a polyamorous type of relationship, I feel just based on my fatherhood, my mission, and my capacity for dating multiple people at one time, I just don't have the energy or the time or the capacity to do so. So I prefer more of a container or monogamous relationship. But am I open that if things were to lead to someone else or another person along the path that was serving for my growth, sure, like coming into terms with, hey, this may be a possibility along this time, and if it is, then maybe this is what we need to grow and evolve. But again, it's so multifaceted, and I don't want to project any of my beliefs of what it should be because I'm really loose and fluid with this.
I
And I
agree.
believe everybody is right to their own experience.
Yep.
But again, when it's approached from a very wide perspective and awareness versus just this narrow, like black or white type of thing.
Yeah. One of the I guess you could call it a fact, and Adam was like, well, how do they know that? It's humans, chimpanzees, and bonobos, which are the two closest to humans in terms of DNA and quote unquote evolution, if you believe in that. But whether you do or not, our DNA is the closest to bonobos and chimpanzees, and then the random one is dolphins. But those are the only four species that procreate outside of ovulation. When I was talking to Adam, I said they were the only ones to do it for pleasure. Was probably not the best way to word it because he was like, well, you can't say dogs don't have pleasure, even if they are only doing it when they're ovulating. Okay, that's a good point. But my point actually was they're the only four species that do it when they're not ovulating. So there's something else going on there. And to me, the word is promiscuous. Like it doesn't make us, horrible. Like you were saying, should we pursue it every single time? No, I think most people have in some way, shape, or form in their life story an experience of maybe they shouldn't have pursued that, with that person or whatever. But I'm in total agreement with you, where I just think it's a choice, a personal choice. But the reason I like to talk about it is because I do think it's important to not close yourself off to other ideas, to explore all of the ideas and then pick which one is best for you based on all of the available information, not closing yourself off based on your particular conditioning or upbringing or domestication, as I like to word it.
100%. And one last thing I'd like to add there is that, I think the association to polyamory is just like it's all about sex, right? So it's just like
Yes.
multiple partners having sex,
Yes.
and it's not.
Right.
It could be a very platonic but emotionally depth relationship,
Right.
right? And this is something that I sort of learned through this process that it doesn't have to be equated to that. But oftentimes in sort of the lower shadowy underworld nature of this, it's very much lustful and it's just about sex. And
Right.
that's where again I would say that, hey, exchanging energy with multiple people in that way, well, that can be a whirlwind of energy and also create a lot of destruction. But again, from a higher perspective, it can actually be quite beautiful and serve as an evolutionary catalyst for you to grow and evolve.
and the tribe. What you were saying there made me want to bring in the tribal or indigenous worldview factor into this, because like you're saying, it's not all sexual. When you really use your imagination and put yourself back in a tribe of 150 people, hunter gatherers, like, yeah, you might share sex, but that's like, it's just another shared resource at that point for the tribe to grow tighter bonds and like understand each other better, and like you were saying, a more emotional platonic, like sex is involved, but it's not the focus for them. It's just part of this tightening of relationships and having a true like band of brothers and sisters, and like
Well,
you're raising your friends and brothers kids, and they're raising your kids. That's
that's
that.
the other missing link here,
Right.
which I'm glad you brought in because it is, and I've heard again. I can't confirm this, but it just makes sense intuitively that multiple people would be together in these ways, and that hey, like I may have been with this woman, but you have, and hey, we don't know whose child it is, but we're gonna
Right.
raise the child together, and that's really like tearing the labels apart and all of this, like coming back to the bare bones. And something that I think is important to bring through here, and what I've learned through my process of living in Africa, right? Very tribally in community, and what that actually means. Because people say community now, but we're still living in silos, we're still living apart, we're not living
Right.
together,
Right.
all of that. When we come into community, which is something that my highest vision in this lifetime is to build community hubs, and I'm actually anchoring that in and as we speak, and what that actually means. Because when we live in community, we are sourcing from the different skill sets and talents and the unique personalities of everybody involved within that tribe and that community and that nucleus to ultimately learn about ourselves and to help each other grow, right? And now we live in a society where that is non-existent, that everybody's sort of isolated on their own and having to carry the weight by themselves.
Mhm.
And therefore I believe really this next evolution of humanity, it's the bifurcation of splitting into the transhumanistic sort of like smart city agenda type of world
Yep.
versus actually coming back to grassroots and coming back to community,
Yep.
and really what that is actually going to look like to help us evolve into the next level. And that's sort of the pathway that I'm very interested in exploring right now. And then, of course, the human relationships that come from that and everything else. But yeah, that's an interesting conversation within itself too.
Yeah. No, because when you were talking about the lustful aspect of it, it's like that when people think of polyamory from this current lower frequency, this more condensed frequency. Yeah, it is. People are like, oh, you just want to fuck a bunch of girls, or like the girls just want to be slutty. It's like, no, when you really bring in the holistic aspect of it and what you're talking about, getting back to grassroots, understanding the weeds and the plants in our backyard that are probably, 80% of them have some sort of medicinal use that could probably replace all these pharmaceuticals that people are on out here. Just the whole thing. People will just focus on the sex part of it, and it's like, no, this is more of a philosophy to me, a
Yeah.
holistic philosophy. So anyhow,
Yeah.
yeah, man, that was a great conversation. I do have one bonus question, because you were talking about yin, and for me, the truth lies beyond the symbols. But because we're humans, we create symbols, we create stories. We're storytelling creatures, and with my favorite symbol, when I think about a symbol that can truly capture the essence of that which is beyond symbols, the yin yang is the one for me. One of the very first psychedelic experiences I had a closed eye visual where I was in like this hyperspace yin yang tunnel thing, but they were all moving. There was nothing static. It was the yin yang in motion. And the intuit that I got was like, this is reality. It's just a balancing of dual forces within a unity that is creation itself. So I just want to hear your thoughts on like the relationship between symbols and the reality beyond symbols, and then why humans use symbols to share our experiences, to like gain value from each other, to learn from each other, to grow with each other. All of that, if you could just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, like symbols has been a part of all of our history, and we can trace back to all the ancient societies and cultures, and we use different symbols to share, not from a standpoint of our own words, but from an energetic standpoint of communication, which is really the greatest form of communication is through these different symbols. And of course, every society and culture had different ways of communicating this energy. And but back to the basis of the yin and the yang, the masculine, the feminine, what I see today, and kind of I've been writing about this a lot lately in my Substack, and just sort of sharing more of my perspective on this. But we have reached a point, as we know, I mean, it's obvious that we've reached a point of imbalance where basically the energetic principles of both the masculine and feminine are completely unbalanced. We live in a very shadow masculine, unintegrated state in this entire world. And what I feel right now is happening is that the feminine is speaking, and she's speaking very loudly. And when I say the feminine, I'm speaking to the earth, I'm speaking to the feminine principle itself. And that specifically because I work with a lot of men, and a big passion of mine is doing men's work, is that really where we're at right now is we have oppressed the feminine so deeply within ourselves, meaning that we've repressed our own emotional, intuitive waters to the point of us then acting out in these points of avoidance, of abuse, of destruction, of degradation of the earth, of women, of all of the different representations of the feminine. And now that energy is speaking so fully through us and through this earth that we have no choice but to listen, unless we are all going to be destroyed from the power and the force of this feminine, which is not docile, which is not going to sit down and take all of this. And therefore, we have a choice but to listen to this energy and to begin to come back into balance and integration within ourselves. And as I explained to men, is like, you know, once we come into balance where we honor the creative, intuitive, receptive, open part of ourselves in this way, we come into wholeness, and therefore the power that we've perceived to be, in this way of control and competition, all of that, our power becomes integrated, and we stand strong, yet we are yielding, we are soft in our hearts, we are open and receptive to life. And this is the dance. And I believe that when not just men but all of us can come into this integrative force of both these energies in a healthy way, that we are going to see a new world be born. And this is why I feel it's so important that men are, specifically because there's been such a deep war on the masculine, to be coming into this work and into this inner work within themselves. And that's how I believe we're going to create a new world. But I mean, it's powerful right now, and there's no fucking around.
No, we are creating it. So, man, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I really, dude, I really appreciate your perspectives, your just the way you see the world. I resonate more than any other guest that I've had on without having like spoken to them, having more of an in-depth conversation with them. You've been exactly where I fit on this spectrum of how we see this thing, matrix simulation experience that we're living right now. One thing I wanted to add as you were saying that though is I think even the yin yang has been corrupted, right? Like a lot of people see it as good and bad or right and wrong, and that is not how I see it at all. I see it as light and dark, masculine and feminine. You need both, and the balance is where the good is. An imbalance on either side is not healthy. I don't want to say it's bad, but it can be a teacher for why balance is important, for sure.
Agreed. And I guess that I'm glad that you brought that through. I feel like I can riff with you for hours here, but what we've existed in this sort of like vacuum has been the symbolism of the patriarchy, which is sort of an imbalance of energies. We've had the symbolism of the matriarchy in both the light and the shadow. And now we're moving into synarchy, which is a term used in the gene keys that I love. It's one of the representation of one of the gene keys. And this is sort of the both of these energies merging together. And it's creating a horizontal plane versus a hierarchical plane. And the horizontal plane is encompassing of all of the human experience, of all of the wisdom and knowledge, and it's showing that we are equals amongst our own leadership, and therefore coming together in these ways to create something new, a new paradigm. But this is meaning that we have to basically exist within now the destruction internally and the mirror of that externally of all of the paradigms we've created in falsehood, and that's what's crumbling right now on this planet. And I'm here for it. It's exciting to see, but it's going to be really intense for a lot of people, and this is a part of it.
Hell yeah. Before we hop off, I just, as you were speaking there, I just thought of like a real life example of this imbalance, of this masculine, because you mentioned the word competition. And to me, I think about playing youth league basketball and youth league baseball growing up. And the imbalance has reached the point where in some small towns, like where I grew up, youth league basketball, I mean, there were like 7 teams when I was playing. Now they're barely keeping 4, and they're probably going to have to lose the league altogether. Why? Because competition has reached a point where it's swallowing cooperation. And people don't realize that, yes, this competition between kids is what helps build social skills and physical skills, motor skills. There's a lot of great skill sets and teachings that come out of team sports. But if the parents can't even cooperate enough to keep the league together, like, the competition is only beneficial within a cooperative container. And people
Mm.
are forgetting the importance of cooperation. You have to have the cooperative container for the competition to be beneficial. If it's all out competition, that's going to eventually break down to war. That's the logical path that's going to follow.
Exactly, dude. 100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, beautifully said.
Hell yeah, man. Well, I'm going to let you get off of here, dude, but under an hour, and I think we had a just very rich conversation, man. I really appreciate your time today. I really appreciate your energy. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you on some of these breathwork sessions.
Sounds good, brother. Thank you for the time.
Enjoy your afternoon.
You too.
Thought I told you there is places that I'd rather go alone. I need time, I need space, got to get that on my own. Yeah, ain't shit that I can tell you, said go listen to my songs. I'm reminded of depression every time I visit. I've been thinking deeply about shallow shit. Like why my ex's IG creeping, yeah, ain't that about the bitch. If it's too late for me to be somebody, please don't tell me lies. I paint pictures, shit that prophecy, too deep to be described. Feel like I lived 1,000 lives, praying curse with 1,000 more. I ain't the person I was before. I took love too personal. Gotta learn to grow from the hurt alone. Gotta hurt for you, learn to grow. Know it hurt to go when shit turned to cold. Boy, it's a labor of love that ain't working though. I mean, the end was kinda toxic. I don't know what else to call it. I ain't say it, but I died at half my family, half her. I came far from flipping burgers. Shit I seen don't give you purpose. Half the kids that I grew up with did a bit for gripping burners, kicking doors, hitting corners. Could have been some kick returners. You a loser or a earner? Just the truth is so sojourner. It's like I woke up and chose violence. There was no guidance from the old timers. 999 news approaching our dudes, scrolling like fuck a timeline. Ruin social life, Google scoping, and they skew on oversight. You don't understand. It's all in the plan. God's an awesome guy. Y'all done brought me for I pray for ramen. I was stopping off at quick fast, no Ramadan. I was off with the gunners on. It was safety off. Did the drama gone. Same shit going on and on. And on and on.